handle the truth.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Welcome back. Saturday night cell block. It's been a minute. How's everybody doing? I pray everybody is safe, sound, happy. Their bellies are full from a wonderful Thanksgiving. But most of all, that you spent it with people that you loved. You were in the arms of comfort, and you were just able to maybe unwind a little bit, relax. But for us in the criminal justice field, that's non-existent. As long as we have our brothers and sisters that are, that remain behind bars, innocent, wrongfully convicted, over sentenced, medically frail, all of these things, we'll continue to fight every day. But welcome back to Saturday Night Cell Block. I have a special guest for you, man. A couple guests. I'm gonna allow you into my home. This is the home that I grew up in. This is where a lot of my chaos ensued. There was a lot of memories in this home right here, good and bad. But I'm gonna bring my parents in, and I'm gonna introduce you to my father. You guys have heard me talk a lot about my upbringing, a lot about my parents, and what made me really decide to do this was, I was at my father's house about a couple weeks ago, and when I was out in the garage, he had asked me a question. He said, do I feel like I would have been better off living with my mother? And in that moment, I realized something, because my father really never watched any of my episodes or anything before, but he has been watching as of late since I started going live on YouTube again. Him and my stepmother, who you will probably meet as well, just have been watching the shows, so they've been hearing a lot of what I've been saying and such. So what this made me realize is exactly why I do what I do. And put these shows out there is to make people just think, just make people reflect and ask questions. And it's okay to ask questions of yourself. It doesn't mean anything, but in that moment, it made me realize that, my father was just questioning. And I appreciated so much the fact that he just asked what my opinion was. And this is a lot of times what we fail to do through life, is just truly ask versus just assume. But with that being said, let me go ahead and bring the old man in. Let you meet him, let him introduce himself, give a little background to who he is and some of his experiences. But there is one, I want you to stick around, because at the end, I'm going to tell a story, very specific story that's very important and needs to be heard by all parents. So let me switch on over. Pops.
Which day, son? Good evening.
What are you doing? How you doing?
I'm doing good.
Doing all right? How you feel?
I feel all right to be 84.
84 years old.
I'll tell you something. If you get to live as long as I have, you'll see more changes in this world than you ever thought you'd see.
Yeah, well, used to tell me that as a kid, man, and used to say a lot of things as a kid that I just couldn't understand as a kid. But now, being 47 years old, and the changes that I've witnessed is astronomical. I mean, I just can't believe the era and time that we sit in now. But and then COVID, what's going to come out of COVID, and how many changes are going to happen after this? But so what is your earliest memory of 84 years? What do you remember?
Being brought up on a farm. My grandfather and grandmother were sharecroppers,
Mm.
and they got to live where they was for nothing but the fellow that owned the house reaped from it. He
Mm.
reaped from my grandpa getting up at daylight and coming in at dark. But them was some of the best times of my life. And I probably remember them more than I remember anything.
Hmm. I
I,
remember one time you.
I
I
could
remember. Go ahead.
I could always tell when we was going to have Sunday dinner, and the family was going to get together. Because my grandmother was out there wringing them chickens' necks as fast as she could do them. And everything we had to eat come off the farm.
I haven't experienced that, until I just went to Switzerland. Like I would share with you. When the lady would ask if I wanted something to eat, and I would just, give her, potatoes and a steak or whatever. We go straight to the meat market and get the butcher they go right in the back, and they butcher the animals first thing in the morning. They have a little freezer up front. This is somebody's home. It's a farmhouse that you go to, and she grew the potatoes and she grew the tomatoes, and she just went out and picked it all and made it from the farm. And that was my first experience really in dealing with something like that. But I remember as a kid, in one of our trips up to Ohio, when we went up to Dayton, I believe, or somewhere around those lines, but you took me the one time to where the house that you grew up in was at. And I remember vaguely that when we went down the street, there was like these two houses, and you're telling me that it was right there, like it's right there. And I'm looking at these two houses, and you're like, no, 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 not the houses. That little shack in between the houses back there is where your dad grew up in. How small was that shack?
Uh, about the size of a standard garage.
And how many brothers and sisters did you have?
I had one brother and one sister. And I can remember one evening, me and my brother slept in bunk beds. My sister slept over beside my mom and dad. And back then, nobody locked their doors or anything like that. And I remember waking up, and there was a man about halfway in the window right beside where I was sleeping. And I screamed for my dad. He come out of that bed, grabbed his 45, and chased that guy clear down the yard shooting at him. They The only thing we used to have a lot of back then was called peeping toms.
Mm,
Every now and then you catch somebody looking in your window.
mm, mm, mm.
But
Talk about Grandpa a little bit. What kind of man was your dad, that you these stories that you're always telling me about your dad?
my dad was part Cherokee. He worked 7 days a week, 365 days a year in a paper mill, which I'll get into later on. And my dad was a drinker. I've been in the car with him and the superintendent of the paper mill with a fifth of whiskey, and Dad's friend would take a drink out of it, and that bottle would be half gone. And my dad would drink the other half of the bottle, and it'd be gone. And I guess I got my toughness and meanness from him because every Saturday night he'd be out drinking and fighting. I go by what they used to call the Eagle there in Franklin. He was a hillbilly. He came from uh, Berea, Kentucky, where he was born. You had to cross a creek to get up to where he was born at. But they always wore long sleeve white shirts, and they'd roll them up. They'd roll the cuffs up halfway up the arm. I went by Eagles one night in my car. My dad was out there fighting, covered with blood.
Mm,
But never missed a day of work, buddy. And when I was when I was going to school, I was in the 8th grade, and it was a small town. And I skipped school one day with the kid that I knew. His dad owned the only filling station in town. So I skipped school with him one day, and we was called to the office the next morning to get paddlings. Well, he went in first, and I was sitting right outside the door. I didn't hear nothing or anything. So he walked out, so they called me in. And he said, all right, Tom, bend over and check what you got coming. I said, nope. He said, what do you mean, nope? I said, I was with him in his car, and you didn't touch him, so you ain't gonna touch me. So here we went. It was the assistant principal and the coach. Took me up to the principal's office. He's gonna get my paddling. So I sit down in the chair. Principal was sitting across the desk. He had his suit jacket on and glasses. And he asked the assistant superintendent, he says, what's wrong? He says, Tom won't take his paddling. And he looked at me, he said, you won't take your paddling, huh? And I said, nope. So he took his glasses off and laid them down on his desk. And he started around his desk, taking his jacket off. That's when I hit him square in the mouth. I said, you didn't paddle him, you're not paddling me. And I stood by that. So, needless to say, that was the end of my school period. I worked in a paper mill for 5 years with my dad, my uncle, my brother. They all worked in the paper mill. It was the only thing there. So I come in one Sunday morning, after drinking over the weekend, and I was doing something that the little foreman didn't like. The little foreman that couldn't read or write his name. He says, you're fired. I said, okay. So I left and went home. The mill was only about a half a block from our house. And it wasn't 5 minutes later that come Dad and the superintendent came back and says, come on, Tom, we want you to come back to work. I said, there is no way in heaven or hell that you'll ever get me back in that paper mill. So that's when I got into woodworking, became a cabinet builder, had my own business for 10 years, a cabinet builder. So I didn't do too bad for finishing 8th grade or part of it. I played basketball there, I played football there. And of course, the only one that ever came to see me, I think my mother came one time to a football game I was playing. But that was pretty well it. And Dad, I never will forget, Dad never told me he loved me. And he had a stroke, and I was in the service. So I got out on a hardship discharge to take care of my mom and my sister because my brother was in the Navy. And he had a stroke. They told him he'd never walk again. And I'd be out driving 5-6 miles away from where we lived, and he'd be walking down the road with a cane. So they put him back to work in the paper mill as a night watchman. So he was a night watchman, and that's where he died at, was in the night watchman house. But after he had a stroke and everything, I pretty well knew what was coming because my dad walked up to me, put his arms around me, said, I love you, son. Only time in my life I'd ever heard it. And I guess that's why I tell both my boys how much I love them every day. So that was pretty much Dad's life. We never had anything, but just like my boys, they always had a roof over their head and food to eat. And that was the main thing to me.
Yeah. How did that make you feel in that moment, if you can remember when he told you that?
It was it was astonishing, and that partly told me that he knew himself that he wasn't going to be here much longer.
Hmm.
And I felt that's something that he wanted to get out.
In your opinion, your expertise of life, 84 years, when he told you that, of course you knew that he meant it. I would think. I mean, let me ask you that. Let me not even assume. Did you, when he told you, did you know that your father loved you?
Well, I always knew that both of my parents loved me. Um, my mother showed it all the time. Um, Dad, I think, he didn't want to show love. I can remember working in the paper mill with him, and he'd be coming in, and I'd be going out, and we'd pass each other. And I said, "Dad, you got a dime? I can get a cup of coffee on the way out." He said, "Son, I don't have a penny," and just kept right on walking. So, but I knew that he loved me.
So, because I mean, we hear this word all the time, right? We hear people tell each other they love them all the time. And in my life, I've heard so many people tell me how much they love me, but you know, that's a different story for another day.
I
But
heard that.
so it's when we're talking about parents to children, is it better, and or how should a parent express that love for that child? Is it better just to sit there and just repetitively tell that them that they love them, or not even say it at all, but just show it through these actions? Like you say, you've never heard your father say it one time, but yet you knew that he loved you, and he wouldn't even give you a penny.
Well, let me put it this way: I didn't know he loved me. I felt that he was loving me because I was the youngest child. Of course, I was always mommy baby, but you always think that your parents love you, and you have to show it more or less, I guess, in ways different than just saying "I love you." You've got to give them, especially when they get older. When they're younger, they're harder to deal with, but when they get older, it's hard to control kids because I've heard you say on your show that a kid's mind ain't involved or whatever it was until they're 24, 25 years old.
That's right.
But yet, why don't people understand then why their kids don't listen to them when you're trying to tell them something? Is it because their mind hasn't grew?
Well, these are the discussions. I mean, my thing is, again, if we know that scientifically that a person, a human being's brain is not fully developed until they're 25, going into their 26th year, and that development is specifically the prefrontal cortex, which is what handles all your emotions, your emotional thought. It does so much. I mean, we'd have to have a doctor in here to talk on that, so I won't elaborate on that too much. But it is your prefrontal cortex that develops in this latest stage. So if we know this, why is the juvenile age limit at 18 years old? Right? There's got to be a reason for that. I know that this is when they're taking young men and women into the military at 18 years old, and is that because they're so much easier to reprogram while that thought process isn't even fully developed yet, because they can get in there and polish off the last part of the growth of that thought process with a military mind, right? Or is there another reason? But because what don't make sense to me is again going back to the Supreme Court ruling of 2016 where it says It is unconstitutional to sentence a juvenile delinquent to life in sentence because of this scientific finding, but yet at 18 years old you can. That makes no sense to me.
Well, and that if you went into service at 18 and you didn't do what you were supposed to, then you get a dishonorable discharge. And that's just like going to prison, because when you're stuck with a dishonorable discharge, that's it. That follows you the rest of your life.
Yeah, it's the same as a felony conviction.
And it's just like, you know, they take them into service when they're 18, but yet they wouldn't let them drink when they was 18. Now, you telling me all these 18, 19-year-olds that went into the service and was in the service and got off on leave wasn't drinking somewhere?
Yeah. Well, let's get back into me so we can wrap up the evening with the story. Um, what would you what and let's bring Rose in. Where's Miss Rose? Let's introduce Miss Rose. This would be a question for both of y'all. This is my stepmother. She's been in my life since I was 5, 6 years old.
Hi.
So so this is the question. The question is, what one event through the many stuck with you guys the most through all of this time that I was involved in? What one thing was the most traumatic for you guys, I guess?
Well, for me, it was when you was about 14 and you was working at a pizza house. And I guess the girl that you was working with had a thing for you and all that.
Okay, hold, stop. That's the story we're gonna share later on. But that story right there is what has always stuck with you, and I know that for a fact because you're always talking about that. But now, Miss Rose.
Well, one of the main things that still stick with me and will stick with me till I die is having to bring your daughter to see you.
Yeah. And I'm gonna bring you on for a whole different show about the experiences of going through prison, coming in, all of that, because that's you guys were on the other side, you know. And again, I share a lot of this stuff and I speak a lot for you guys. But while you guys are here, I want you guys to speak on that too, because that is the whole purpose of doing what I do. So, but Miss Rose, for you.
For me, I guess, you were not a good student. Not that you weren't smart, because you were, but you didn't want to go to school. You didn't want to be in school. Um, and I worked for the school system, so I kept insisting that they test you and, do some sort of evaluation to see, what if there was something wrong. And so they did a psychological evaluation on you and testing and so on and so forth. And I got a call from the um, psychologist and who did the testing. And you were 14 years old. And he told me, we were on the phone probably for about an hour. I'll never forget it. He told me that you were going to get in trouble. I said, in trouble? He said, yes. He said, he's definitely going to get in trouble. He has like a lack of responsibility for his age level. And so he doesn't think that when he does something that it's wrong, or he's going to, there's any consequence. I think he kept using that word, consequence. And you were going to get in trouble, that we needed to try to get you some counseling and so on and so forth. And we did, but it was shortly after that, I'd say maybe a couple of months, that you first got in trouble. Yes.
And that was the breaking into the houses.
Yes. Yes.
Which at that time I was already probably, I think, breaking into the houses, because that was a span of a little while.
Right.
When I got caught, I was already broken into 14 or 15 different houses. But so this was the school psychologist?
Yes. One of the county psychologists, yes.
One of the county psychologists. And did they ever follow up with you? Did they ever come back to you, check on you? Did they ever offer any programs or any guidance, assistance, or anything of that nature?
He was definitely guiding me and telling me that I needed to do something because.
Well, just in that initial meeting, right? Just in that one meeting?
Yes, a very long telephone call. And he said, get back with me if there's, anything further that I can, do, evaluate Thomas. And, but at that point, like I said, shortly after that, we tried to get you counseling, and that was kind of mute because I don't believe that you were responding to the counselor. And it was just like almost too late. You were about 12 years old when I said to your dad, I said, he's changing. There's something that's different about him. And your father said, no, he's just becoming a man, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I never had boys. I had no idea. I had girls, the children. And, but I could see that there was something was not right. And I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was.
So the question was how one of the most, what stuck with you the most out of everything. And so how did that stick with you? Why did that one particular thing stick with you?
When that psychologist called me, I was like, I can't even tell you. I was just so stricken with upsetness, not knowing what to do for you, because I didn't want you going in this path that he was telling me you were going to go in. And it was really difficult. It really was. I mean, there were lots of things that stuck with me, but this was the first one, and I will simply never forget it. And then, of course, you went to that youth camp, and it was just on and on from that point on. You're right. When you say from 14 years old, it was like nonstop. And you're exactly right.
Are you familiar with there in Pasco County, the school to prison pipeline that has been uncovered with the program that they had, where the schools were notifying the sheriff's office of any delinquency, any I think, I can't remember what the GPA limit was, but there was a threshold, and if that student missed so many days, was absent from school so many days under this GPA threshold, there was several circumstances that the child had to meet, but the school, every school in Pasco County, was keeping a list of all these children and turning them over to the sheriff's office.
No, I was not familiar with that. I worked in an elementary school, and the time that I was in the elementary school, I do not believe that was applicable. No.
Can you tell me or answer me why they let kids stop going to school at age 16, that they don't have to go anymore?
I have no idea. I mean, there's so many questions as to why. Why is our global ranking, our educational global ranking, so low? And why has there never been no strategic issue to fix that? I mean, our infrastructure just got a $1 trillion upgrade, but our schools have never gotten a $1 trillion upgrade. You know, they got the Hard Rock out here in Tampa that was a large portion of this was supposed to go to the educational system. But our education, right, well, yeah, and our educational system hasn't gotten improved at all. So it's like, again, they use the educational system for sympathy for the people to get these these motions passed or whatnot, but nothing never comes back to the community. But so moving forward, right, with that there and these issues, kind of explaining, what I'm getting ready to go into, but to wrap this evening up with you guys and to get into what you were talking about, that is to set the scenario. So I've already been in and out of jail a couple times, JDC, whatnot. And JDC, then I went to jail, and was this when I came home from state prison?
Yes, I believe so.
So the whole reason of me going to state prison was to relinquish me from, because I was constantly on probation, constantly on house arrest, constantly, and I wasn't minding any of it. I would just continue to get small little weed charges, just nuisance charges, things like that. There was always a cop around me. These are the things that this is why I bring up the thing about the list, right? Because as I'm collecting all this information on my life, so much is making sense, and there was always a cop around me. There was always a cop that knew my name, and it seemed like to always be the same cops. Of course, at this time, now this area is a small area, and at this time particularly, right, it's blown up now, but at this time particularly, it was not a very big area. There were not a lot of cops that patrolled, especially late at night. So I always just reckoned it as that. But I would love to find if my name was on one of these lists, because it's just always peculiar how even the shotgun incident at your house, Dad, in that house right there, the one episode that I put out about the shotgun incident, those cops that came to that house knew us, all of us that were there. They walked in and called our names. And that's what I'm saying, is it's just mind-boggling. But now things start to make sense. But going back to it, right? So I went to prison. I asked the judge for state prison to eliminate all of this paperwork so I could just come home, rebuild my life, start over, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So I go to state prison. I come back. Nothing changes. Fall right back into the same crowd, got into the same thing, and started getting back into trouble again. So there's one particular time I'm on probation, and I'm working to fulfill the probation needs, right? So I'm working at a privately owned pizza shack, is the actual name of it at the time, and it stayed open late. It was one of the pizza parlors at that time that stayed open late. We had a club that stayed open till 2 a.m. This pizza place stayed open till 3 specifically for that crowd. So it was just me and a chick named Christina, right? And this Christina chick has such a crush on me that she's following me around everywhere. She's coming to dope spots that I'm hanging out in. She's coming, like, wherever I'm at, this chick is following me around, and she just wasn't my type.
She called here continuously for you.
She was stalking me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? She was a stalker, right? So I didn't know this at the time, and I probably played a lot into it because I worked with her, and I was a very flirtatious kid. You know what I mean? I never was one to hurt people's feelings. You know what I mean? I was very insecure. I was very I was not outspoken about my feelings. You know what I mean? So I could have led her on in some fashion, some ways. But this one particular night, it's her and I in this pizza shack, and we're working, and there's no business whatsoever. And she said that she wanted to go hang out with her boyfriend, and she wanted to close up early. So she called the owner of the place and asked if we could close up early. And he said no, right? Just wait till the club closes out. You'll get some traffic then. This is why we stay open. So I say, all right, cool. So I actually go outside to my car, and I'm sitting out in the car, and I'm smoking a joint, and I see her on the phone. So I get out of the car, and I walk inside, and I ask her, what's going on? Is that a delivery? And she's like, no, that was the boss man. He just called and said, it's okay, go ahead and close up. So now I'm thinking, well, that's odd. because 10 minutes ago he wanted us to stay open for the, for the late night. But I'm like, all right, cool, because I could have went anywhere. So I asked her if she needed help cleaning up, and she's like, no, I got it. You can go, right? I get in my car. I go and stay at this chick's house that I was staying with at the time, or not staying with, but that I was messing with at the time. And I go to my father's house like at 7 o'clock in the morning, right? Now, my father's got a very beautiful, small, humble home, right? There's only so many. He's got his habits of where he sits, and that hasn't changed in the last 30 some odd years that he's been in this home. So when I come through this door and I see this man in this particular spot at that particular time, I've seen this many times before, I know something's wrong. So I asked my dad, what's wrong? He's like, where was you at last night? I said, I was at my girl's house. He's like, what was you doing? I said, I ain't do nothing. He said, don't lie to me. I said, Dad, I'd never lied to you about nothing like this. I said, I wasn't doing anything. I said, I worked at the pizza shack and we closed. I said, we closed early and I went to my girl's house. So I said, why? What's up? He said, I don't know. He said, some cops came here about 3-4 o'clock in the morning looking for you. And they said, I told them you weren't here. And they said, okay, well, they'll be back tomorrow. So I said, I looked at my dad. I said, Dad, I have no idea. Could be anything. Who knows? I don't care. I'm tired. I'm going to sleep. So I went in there and laid down. Sure enough, he come and woke me up about 12 o'clock. And then I'll let my father take the story from here.
So the first time they banged on the door, and I mean, when they banged on the door, they banged on the door.
This was at the 3 o'clock in the morning?
Yes, it scared
Okay.
me and Rose to death. So we went to the door and they wanted to know where he was. We said, we don't know. He's not home from work yet. So he gave us the card and said, well, when he comes home, have him call us. So we gave you the card. You called them. They come out. When they came to the front door, they said, we need to come in and see Thomas. We got to ask him some questions about an incident that went on. So we didn't know any better. So we said, okay. So when you got up and everything, and this detective says, all right, Thomas, I want you to sit down here now, spell out everything on this pad that you've done and what happened the night before. So I was standing there watching you write it out and everything. And it didn't pop in my mind whatsoever. But when he told you to sign it, that's when it hit me. And it hit you because that's when they put the handcuffs on you and took you out of this house. Nobody, I don't care who it is, should let any law enforcement in their house unless they got a piece of paper in their hand that says warrant. Other than that, don't let them in your house because they'll tell you one lie after another to get in your house to do what they have to do.
Did they tell you that they weren't there to arrest me, that they were there just to find out what was going on? And
They didn't say that. They just said that they was there to ask you some questions about what happened the night
About an incident.
the incident that happened that morning.
mm-hmm.
And of course, that's the reason I was asking you when you got home what incident they were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But buddy, if I'd have known then what I know now, they wouldn't have handcuffed you and took you out of here that day.
So the incident, what the incident was earlier that night, Christina and I were playing around in the pizza shack, and we were just like any other time, we were just flirting around, and this girl cornered me, and she had like a pizza cutter knife, right, or whatever the hell it was, and she's got it up against my stomach, right, and she's like, tonight you're not going nowhere. Tonight you're effing me. So she's got it up against my stomach like this. So what I do is I take her hand and I spin her, whop, And now I got her up against me, right? Up against my whole body. And I got the thing up against her neck now. And I got her like this. And I'm like, man, don't quit playing with me, Christina. Quit playing with me. You know what I mean? Quit playing with me. And I let her go. And that was it, right? And several hours went by of us just in there doing whatever before the incident where she tried to call to get off the first time, whatever. But what ended up happening was...
So what happened to you when you went to court?
So when they arrested me and took me out, I can't really remember too much about that car ride or whatnot. I can't really remember too much about any car ride going to jail. It's almost like I just shut down. You know what I mean? Because there's many times where I tried to reflect on those car rides going to jail, and it's just a blur. But I ended up taking this to trial. One thing about me is every crime that I ever committed, if I knew that I did wrong, I would admit to the wrong. You know, I would always admit to the wrong. But when I did not do right, or if I did not do what they accused me of doing, I always fought them, no matter what. And that's taking the federal government to trial too. Whether it's the state of Florida or the United States, it didn't matter to me. What matters to me is me proving my point when I'm right. That's how I am. That's how I'll always be. So I took this to trial. And at the time, what made it so bad was I had 3 beautiful girls, right? Friends of mine, right? 3 of them dropped dead, gorgeous, that came into the courtroom with me during that trial. And when Christina didn't, she wasn't even in the courtroom through the whole ordeal until it was her time to testify. And when she comes in and testifies, she comes flying into the courtroom, with a hot mess, and jumps up on the stand and tells her elaborate story of what happened that night, which I'll get into, and then gets off the stand and leaves, and she's gone without a care of what happened to me, whatever, right? The story was this. The story was that I tried to rape her, and I held a knife up to her throat trying to rape her, and by the grace of God, she was able to get away, right? And she even went so far and took something and scraped it across her neck to try to make it appear that a knife was pressed up against her neck. This is how sick some women are now, right? That saved me. That right there saved me, because if she wouldn't have done that, these people would have convicted me of rape, because I had no other way to prove that she was lying. Why that saved me is because those paramedics saw those marks and knew that it did not come from a knife. It came from her grabbing a paper clip or something, right? Thank God these paramedics were doing their job that night and evaluating and being honest. Thank you, EMS, because they came and testified to it. And that was the ultimate decision. However, because I was honest with the police and I signed that statement explicitly telling the police exactly what happened, like I just explained to you, same detail, right? They arrested me for aggravated assault with intentions to do bodily harm was the charge. I took it to trial, but because I told the truth, they still found me guilty. Not of the aggravated assault, but of a lesser charge, which is improper exhibition of a weapon,
Right.
which is a misdemeanor.
Right.
It's a misdemeanor. I paid a fine, $200 fine, no probation, no nothing. It was over and done with, right? It was over and done with. The importance of this right here was that even though I took this charge to trial and was found not guilty of aggravated assault with bodily harm and found guilty of the lesser charge, improper exhibition of a weapon, that followed me through my whole incarceration, my whole federal this is how I landed in a high security prison because of this this whole incident.
Right.
This is why the trauma that I endured going through my prison incarceration happened because of this incident, and it was false. It's all based off a lie. And even though that I was found not guilty at trial, I was still held guilty of it in the system.
Yep.
And that's the story. That's the story. You know, my father loves to tell that in every way that he can because, like he said from the beginning, this is what stuck out to him the most. You know, because my father had a deep respect for the police. But they lied to him. You know, they lied to him, they duped him to get into his home to arrest his son who was innocent of what he was being accused of, without even really trying to understand my side of the story or even allow me to defend my side of the story. Their whole intention was just to get me to get it on the paper and get them to sign it. That was what their intention was, not to mediate, but again, that's another story. Any parting ways, any parting words? I mean, I'll have you on again. We got many stories to tell, but
Oh, yeah, I got another one to tell you about the police and what happened to me.
go ahead, shoot, Pops.
Well, it was when your brother was 16, your mother brought him to me and told me that she couldn't handle him anymore, that she wanted me to have him. I said, fine. So it got to the point where I didn't want you boys broke up. And like I said, your dad was a drinker. So I went to your mother's house one day, and we was in the kitchen talking about you and her giving me custody of you. And the next thing you know, I had her pinned up against the wall, or somebody called the police. There was 5 sheriff cars came, and there was 5 sheriff's men. Each one of them got out of the car. So we stand in the front yard, and I was trying to talk some sense into your mother. And the cops wouldn't let me. And I said, well, I'll go back in the house then until she comes in. I'll talk to her in there. So I started in the house, and they said, no, you're not going in the house. So I looked over my shoulder, and by this time I was running. And they were running right after me. And I no sooner got through the door than a cop was on top of me, had a 6-cell flashlight cocked back to hit me in the head with. Well, my instinct just snapped in, and I reached up and got him by the throat. So, needless to say, I went to court on that, and I was out on bond. And your mother was up at a bar one time, and her boyfriend called me and told me he was going to beat the shit out of me and everything else. And knowing your dad, he went up there to see. And I was set up. I wasn't there long enough to hit him in the face about 4 or 5 times and get him on the ground. There must have been 7 cops there. So they handcuffed me, pulled me off of him, threw me in the back of the cruiser, and they went over and talked to this guy. And this guy had better sense than to press charges against me. So he said, no, I'm not pressing those charges. So they came back over, turned me loose, and I left. But anyhow, then I went to court. After the guy hit me with a flashlight, I still got the scar, blood running down my face. They want me to go get it cleaned up. No, I'll go like this. So I went in front of the judge, blood streaming down my face and all that. My shirt half tore off of me. Anyhow, they found me guilty. The judge says, I tell you what, Mr. Harold, I'm going to give you a year and a day so you can see what the system's like. Didn't bother me. I'd been in the service to me, going there was like being in the service. The only thing that really pissed me off is the judge never called me back to ask me how I liked it.
So you went through Butler and whatnot in the 70s.
Yes. And most of them knew I wouldn't take no crap from nobody. We was sitting there, 4 or 5 of us playing cards. One guy was crazy. I mean, they had him shackled and everything else to put him in the van to take him up there. So he was in the cell with us. And 4 or 5 of us sitting there playing cards. Man, he'd come over there swinging his arm, threw all the cards off the table and everything else. And guys scattered like a bunch of chickens. I just sit there. The guy never did say a word to me. And that, from that day on, that's the way I carried myself through that whole thing. I got out. I spent 3 months. I got out and or went to Zephyr Hills on work release. They found out I was a cabinet maker. I went outside the fence, worked in the shed out there, rode around with the guy to fix locks and everything. But that's just another incident where the cop was going to hit me and I wasn't going to do nothing. And the cop come in the next day, had that beautiful big white collar around his neck like I choked him to death. And knowing if I wanted to, I'd have pulled his Adam's apple out. But that's how they do you. They make you look like the biggest writer there ever was.
Now, let me ask this one final question. Then we got to go. One final question. I've always said, and you've heard me say many times, that this is an emotional family, and that we've always reacted emotionally and just done things out of anger, out of whatever. That night, would you say that you acted emotionally? And
when the cop was going to hit me?
No, when you even went over there, on your way over there, and I know you went over there mad as hell, determined that you were going to put down.
But let me tell you how smart your dad was.
Okay.
That 3 months I sit in that cell in prison, my mind was going 90 miles an hour, buddy. And when I went to work release, I talked your mother into coming over and seeing me. So she kept coming over and seeing me. I finally talked her into marrying me again. And she married me again. So we lived together for about a month. She says, Tom, I don't want to be married no more. She said, you give me X amount of dollars and you can have custody of Shane and all the furniture and everything else. I said, okay. So I gave her the money and I got you. And the thing of it is, I had all this planned out in my mind. I knew what I was going to do. And if I knew all this to start with, I wouldn't have had to go to jail.
That was not the question. The question was, or have you never even thought about it? Have you ever even thought about what would be different if I didn't even go to the house that night? What made you go to the house that night? What made you go to that house that night that resulted in you hemming my mother up against the wall, having the cops come there, and getting into that altercation?
It was in the daytime, and it was always on my mind that I wasn't going to have you boys split up. We was a family, and we was going to stay a family. I didn't care whether your mother was or not.
So when Mom dropped my brother over there and kept me, that's what made you go over there trying to get custody of me, and she wouldn't do it.
That's right.
And you try to make her.
That's right. But I wasn't as smart as I was when I sat in jail for 3 months.
That's a good point. And on that note, we're out of here. Thank you, Pops.
Yeah, we'll talk to you later, son.
Absolutely. I thank you for coming on, and thank you for sharing. Thank you, Miss Rose, for sharing as well. And thank you for inviting us into your home. And that's it. These are my peoples, man.
Night, son.
All right. Good night. So that's it, everybody. I hope that you enjoyed that. Again, thank you for tuning in and allowing us to share, some of these memories. These are important aspects of my life that shaped and molded and created the path that I went down, unbeknownst at the time. And also give you a glimpse into some of my history. And, you could see we just have a long standing of confrontation with the police, So once again, thank you for joining in. I hope that the message was clear through here. And we just have to be better parents. We have to be more mindful of how we interact, the things that we do in front of our children, the decisions that we make that is going to mold and sculpt our children's thought process and decision making in all the years ahead. So I love you guys, man. Thank you for tuning in. Again, another Saturday Night Cell Block. I will see you again live Thursday night. Get right with Demetrius Knuckles Hill up there in Detroit, Michigan. Juvenile lifer that was released in the 2016 overturned Supreme Court ruling. Please also visit www.cominghomecoalition.com. I need support. Even if you go in and subscribe for $1 a month, $1 a month, that joins you into a community, a team, and it allows you to have access to this whole criminal justice family that I'm building. If you need life coaching, if you need mentorship for somebody that's incarcerated on addiction, maybe you need parenting advice, maybe you have a juvenile that just needs a mentor, somebody to talk to, question, things of that nature, you have access to that for $1 a month. Newsletters, any kind of awareness that you want to bring to anything that you have going on. You have access to the show, which of course that's pricing on the side as well. But you have access to all of Coming Home Coalition, Thomas Free Me, what we do, because this is a family. You help me, help you, help the community. And that's what we do. So please, www.cominghomecoalition.com. $1 a month, people. Please. Goes a long way with small nonprofits like myself. So until then, Thursday night, stay safe, stay blessed. And we out, man. Take care.
You can't handle the truth.